Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Josh Guerrero, and I'm the host and founder of this podcast, which is simply titled the All Around Adventure Podcast. Whether you're joining me for the first time or if you've been listening for a while now, I certainly do want to welcome you here. And as always, I want to thank you for being here today, just because I know how important your time is and that you're busy and you got a lot going on, but it just means so much to me that you've chosen to download and listen to this podcast. Now, if you are in fact new to this podcast and you're not entirely sure what we're all about here, this is the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. And that's now done through 3 different shows on this podcast. I have my regular show, which is an interview show where you get to hear stories from myself, as well as the amazing travelers that I am speaking with. I also have my Wisdom Wednesday segment, which just includes tidbits for maybe about 5, 6, 7 minutes over a single self-development topic or travel tip, something along those lines. Just something for you to ponder on as you carry out with the rest of your week. And the last show that I have is the one that you're listening to right now, and this is called The Blog Readings, which is exactly how it sounds, right? I just read my blog posts, both past and present, for you to have an audio format on the go. But for this segment, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I won't actually be reading a blog post today, but what I am going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing an episode from another podcast that I was a part of. And not too long ago, I was interviewed for the Man of Mastery podcast with host Michael Bulloch. Now, this was a fun and interesting interview for me because I got to talk a little bit about my early days as a traveler. That goes all the way back to my 2-week study abroad to Japan about, almost 9 years ago now. And then I also talk a little bit about my time as an expatriate, both in the Gambia during my Peace Corps service and in England when I was a grad student. And I also got to talk about my upcoming expedition to South America in June that I've dubbed Operation Dual Trek, where I'll be walking the length of both Paraguay and Uruguay in order to raise money for the American Veterans Archaeological Recovery, which is a nonprofit organization that's on a mission to help veterans through field archaeology. And I really had a lot of fun on the Man of Mastery podcast. I think Michael is a brilliant host, and you all actually get to hear him on my show next Saturday, because not only did I get to make an appearance on his podcast, but he made an appearance on mine as well, and that episode will go live next Saturday. So I definitely encourage you all to tune in for that one as well. But for now, let's just go ahead and get into today's episode. And this is my interview on the Man of Mastery podcast.
Josh Guerrero is an archaeologist, philanthropist, veteran of the Marine Corps and Peace Corps, a versatile traveler and adventurer intent on, as he says, making the most of his time on this wonderful planet. A 2-week study abroad in Japan as a young student ignited Josh's love of international travel and a desire to see much, much more of the world. Since then, as he'll tell us, he's done 2 stints as an expatriate in the Gambia, West Africa for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer, and even a year in England as a grad student. Josh is also the creator and host of the All Around Adventure travel blog and podcast, where he shares amazing tales from afar and the all-important life lessons that go along with them. So Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Michael. I'm looking forward to our conversation today and sensing a little bit of deja vu, because I think we just did this last week, didn't we? You were joining me for the All Around Adventure podcast. So I guess if the listeners enjoy what they hear today, go check out that episode where Michael joins me on my show. I think they'll enjoy it too.
Yeah, we definitely share that passion for international travel, and I think the importance and the understanding of how it enriches our lives and helps us grow. So I was honored to be on your podcast. It's always interesting with this format. We recorded that one a week or so ago. We'll see which one airs first. So the timing thing is always kind of crazy. But let's jump right in and talk about how you initially caught that travel bug. I know you grew up in the Detroit area, and there's Canada right across the river. But I think the first time you really went abroad was, as I mentioned, to Japan. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And seeing that I'm only from Michigan, I don't really count Canada as an international travel experience. It's just a quick drive right across the bridge and you're there. But yes, I was an undergrad in college when I decided to do the study abroad to Japan. It was for a sociology credit that I didn't actually really need. I just really wanted to go to Japan, and I linked up with the professor. He was actually doing this trip for the first time, so I was going to be part of his beta test group, if you will. And I've always been fascinated by the country. I kind of grew up watching anime. I was a big fan of Dragon Ball Z and all those like Toonami shows on Cartoon Network when I was growing up as a kid. And to some degree, I still kind of am. I'm a little bit of a geek that way. So, and also I'm a martial artist. So learning a little bit about the samurai and the ninja and hearing a little bit of the history of the country as well really intrigued me. So I knew I had to capitalize on this opportunity. And I just had an absolutely amazing time. It's just the culture, for one, was absolutely amazing. You know, Japanese are very friendly people, very polite. You go to a store, purchase some things. As you're leaving, the cashier will bow to you and you'll return that in kind as well. Everyone's greeted you with a smile. It was really amazing. And just seeing how beautiful the country was. And you're looking at these buildings that are centuries old and still in very pristine condition. And also the food. My gosh, Michael, if the food was just out of this world, it was so good everywhere you went. And I remember going to a kaiten sushi, which if anyone's never been to a kaiten sushi before, if you love sushi, you'd love one of these places. There's like a conveyor belt that goes through the entire restaurant with plates of sushi. Just grab something you like. They count the plates that you stack, and then that's how they'll charge you at the end. So it's kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet, but not at a fixed price. So
Yeah.
you will get charged for what you eat.
I never knew it had a name. That's one of my son's favorite things. We did it for the first time in Australia. He loves the conveyor belt sushi.
Yeah, that was definitely the first time I've had that experience. And and I went on a rampage, let me tell you. I wrote a blog post about that, so I'm sure someone can find that later on after they're done listening to this. But really just having that experience. And also, I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to international travel. When I took this trip to Japan, I was 25 years old. And it kind of made me think to myself, man, have I really been missing out on all of this like this whole time? And so returning from that trip, I thought to myself, well, how can I get more of this? I mean, that's one country out of 193 countries in the world that, you know, there's so much else still out there for me to see. So one thing led to another, and we'll kind of cut a long story short here, but following the time I had graduated from college and after Japan.
Quick interruption, Josh. So let me ask you something about Japan, because I know we're going to hit some more food stories. You and I both love food, and traveling and food go hand in hand. And I haven't had the pleasure of Japan yet myself either. But I was talking to a buddy about it recently. And, you know, on this show, we talk a lot about mindset.
Right.
Part of that sometimes is about quieting the mind and being present, you know, being present in whatever task you may be doing. You know, sometimes I talk to my son about his focus as he's brushing his teeth, you know, or it could be something much more complex, right? And the buddy I was just talking to about Japan was talking about, that was the one thing that surprised him, was that presence with which everybody went about their task. Whether it was, I just remember an example he gave. If you're walking, you're walking. You know, if you stop at a vending machine for a bottle of water, you stand there and you enjoy your bottle of water. You don't walk and drink your water at the same time. There's just an intense focus to the quality of everything they do, is my impression.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as well. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily taboo per se, but if you were to go in there as a foreigner or a gaijin, and you were to like walk and eat at the same time, you'll probably get some strange looks as well. Like they probably won't like insult you for it or anything like that, but it's just not something that's really done there. Like you said, it's just, and I also kind of felt like whatever it is that they're pursuing, yes, they do have that intentionality behind it, as if they're seeking like perfection in what it is that they're doing. And to some degree, it's considered an honor to be able to do the things that they do. Let's talk about the service industry, for instance. In a restaurant, you don't tip. And to them, it's an honor to be able to provide you with that service of being, you know, your waiter, your host, your hostess. So yes, a lot of focus indeed, and that was certainly something that I really kind of appreciated, and it kind of created, I guess I'll say, a chill atmosphere, because I just felt really at ease everywhere I went in that country. I went to 7 different cities during the 2 weeks that I was there, and typically here in the States, I feel like my guard is up a little bit more in American cities, like especially being in Michigan and growing up near Detroit and things like that. But there is just, I wouldn't say I was totally carefree, but I felt like I could kind of like let my guard down just a little bit. It was just an interesting vibe about the place.
That's really interesting. Yeah, intentionality sounds like a really good word for it. And along with mindset, I think one of the things I think about is productivity, whether it's my work life, my personal life, finding time for all the things we want to do. And I think this idea we had for a while in American culture of multitasking has really been dispelled. And intentionality is a great way to think about it. So I love that.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'd say that multitasking is a myth. You're only shifting your focus. Like if you are, like, let's say, texting and driving, if you're going down and you're texting, you just shifted your focus away from the road where it should be to what it is that you're trying to type or what it is that you're trying to read. So you can't really multitask. You just shift your focus. And I think in this day and age, it's kind of a little bit difficult to do that, isn't it? Because I say we have a lot of clutter in our lives, not only with just what we have to do on the regular, like you're a father, you got your fatherly duties, you got your duties as a husband, you got your brand that you're trying to build. And in my case, I also have a full-time job as an archaeologist that I do. And we continue to add a lot of clutter in our life with this. Now I'm holding this up as if like the listeners can see what I'm doing, but I'm holding up my smartphone. Like this is, it could be a very powerful tool. You and I got connected this way, but it could also be the devil. And, and there's a lot of things that could lead to a downward spiral in our lives with this thing too. So you can build an empire with this thing, or you can let it drive you into deep despair. It's kind of up to you how you do that. So going back to what we talked about, intentionality is being intentional with what we let into our lives and also up here into our brains as well. So for sure.
Yeah, well said. Well, I shifted your gears back to Japan. I think you were going to segue into coming back from Japan and the bug that left you with and how you pursued it next.
Yeah, because when I got back from Japan, I was maybe about a semester away from graduating, and I was actually an elementary education major, believe it or not. And by the time I had graduated, the education system in Michigan was just in really, really bad shape. They were closing down schools. They were letting go of teachers left and right. So they had a lot more licensed teachers in the state than they had jobs for everybody. So at that point, I kind of had to make a decision. I was thinking to myself, well, what am I supposed to do now? I mean, if I can't find a job, am I just going to be unemployed with just not having anything to do? So cutting a long story short yet again, because I could talk about this for a good while, but I decided to choose Peace Corps because Peace Corps actually has education sectors in different countries around the world. And so I'm thinking, well, I just so happen to now have skills in that. So I applied and I received an invitation letter to the Gambia. And looking at that letter, and I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this
Go for
podcast,
it.
but I said, where the fuck is the Gambia? Because I had never heard of the country before. So I went online, went to the good old Google, and I typed it in. Turns out it's the smallest country on the entire African continent. It's maybe about half the size of New Jersey, so pretty tiny country. And I thought to myself, do I really want to go there of all places? I mean, I never even heard of it. I don't even know like what's there. But the thing is that I felt like I had to capitalize on the opportunity because the way that Peace Corps invited me to go was very formal. They FedExed me this like big giant blue envelope with an actual typed out letter and everything with all the details and all kinds of other like supporting documents. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I turn this down, I don't think they're going to go through the trouble to send me another fancy schmancy, envelope like this again. And I knew I was committed to going. And of course, I had this adventurous spirit that I just cultivated from Japan. So I maybe pondered on it for a day, and then I emailed them in the instructions based on the instructions that they sent me. And then a few months later, I was on a plane to West Africa
Oh man, that's
to go live there for
incredible.
2 years.
Yeah, and I know some of what you and I talked about on my visit on your podcast was about things being uncomfortable, and there's a lot of that opportunity in traveling, and just the idea of a travel destination that you don't really know much about can be very uncomfortable sometimes. And I really applaud that you just rolled the dice and did it. I can think of a couple quick examples where I missed those opportunities. I remember being a kid, and my mom had an opportunity where she went to Mexico for a visit, and my brother went along. And I decided to stay behind because I was on track for a perfect school attendance record that year. And we're talking like, I don't know, eighth grade or something. And not to say school's not important, but in hindsight, man, international travel was probably a lot more interesting and educational than a couple days of school. Or I even had a chance as a young adult. I had a job opportunity to get rotated to an assignment in Germany. And at the time, I had just zero interest in Germany, and I know I had some real sort of stereotypes of what working in Europe might look like versus other places in the world, and I turned it down. And in hindsight, there's a lot that I have not been to Germany yet, and there's a lot that interests me about going to see that I would have had a chance to explore by living there for a while. So I think it's awesome that even as a young guy, you just said the Gambia, don't know, let's do it.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, yeah, those uncomfortable situations, they may be awful in the moment, depending on, what they are. But looking at them in hindsight later on, you can't help but just like look back and laugh just a little bit. And also, those are the types of stories that you're going to want to like pass on throughout the years and talk about. Because like going back to the example that you just said, if by the way, did you say that you ended up going down to Mexico or you stayed in school?
I
To get
did
the
not.
attendance?
I stayed in school.
Okay, because I bet like if you did go to Mexico, we'll just say that's going to probably be a story that you're going to want to tell people down the line, not necessarily like, yeah, I had perfect attendance in school. So
Right.
not
I
not
can't
not to
even remember
insult
what
you, man, but
exact no, it's worthy of it. I can't even remember what grade it was. I couldn't pull out a certificate or an award or anything that came out of that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of travel, and you talk about it, is about making memories.
yeah, definitely. And especially if you have like those uncomfortable situations and those misadventures, like I said, those are the ones that you kind of do reflect and look back on with, a little bit of nostalgia, right? Because it's not like the moments where everything was sunshine and rainbows that you're going to want to tell people. It's like those awful times, like, oh my God, this like one time I freaking had Giardia so bad. I slept like the entire night on my pit latrine. And I'll probably explain that a little bit more in depth as we go here. But it's just, yeah, those memories, I think, and I'm kind of looking ahead a little bit when I'm, let's say, pretty much towards the end of my life, I'm on my deathbed and I'm back and looking at it all. I want to be able to look back on everything and say, my God, it was one hell of a ride. Not the and I don't want to think about, man, I really wish I didn't play it so safe. What if I had done this? What if I had done that? What if I traveled to that place? Or even on like smaller scale items too. What if I asked my boss for that promotion? What if I went to go talk to that girl in the coffee shop that I thought was beautiful and I wanted to meet her? Is just taking those risks regardless of and also just simply going along with just saying getting out of your comfort zone. We've heard that a million times, and for a good reason too, because there is so much value when you actually do decide to get out of your comfort zone. And again, I just think, like I said, I kind of think long term here is that what am I going to look back on my life and be more happy that I have done? It's going to be the uncomfortable things, not the times where I decided to play it safe and I just let all these opportunities pass me by.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me about the Gambia and what kind of opportunity that was like. Was it was and you and I met, by the way, I believe, by way of the Spartan Up Media Fest, ultimately from Tahoe, but more directly through Patrick Sweeney, whose book "Fear is Fuel" dropped yesterday. So I think a lot of these kind of decisions are around fear, either giving into fear or using fear to be harnessed and kind of drive you forward into something like, hey, let's take that blue packet from the Peace Corps and go figure out what the Gambia is all about.
Yeah, and definitely, I really had that great conversation with Patrick about fear and everything like that. And also, I think that's what kind of continues to keep me going now. Is and then that definitely correlates with the point that I had just made about fearing regret later on down the line in my life too. And I think there was a lot of things about Gambia that I was kind of a bit afraid of and nervous of at first. Obviously, we're talking about an entirely different culture than my own. And also I had come to find out that the predominant religion of the country is Islam, and I was raised Catholic, so it's entirely different too. So I knew that was going to be a little bit of a change for me, because also at this point I wasn't really too familiar about the ways of Islam and things like that. And then also I knew I was going to be stripped of a lot of my modern amenities. And by the time I got to my village called Baja Kunda, which is a little bit further into the eastern side of the country, that became apparent very quick. I was shown the house that I was going to be living in for 2 years. No electricity, no running water. My toilet was a pit latrine, literally a hole in the ground, like in the backyard. And you see like little foot placements there, like kind of close to the hole. And I'll just let everyone use their imagination as to what those foot placements were there for. But so I knew what I was going to be up against. And I obviously, I had a kind of a lot of fear going into that too. I'm like, can I really live like this for 2 years? Because here I was about 26 years old at the time, and 26 years of my life, I pretty much had it made for all intents and purposes. I had electricity. I could go to the sink anytime I want and, turn it on. I'd have fresh and clean drinking water. But now here we are. I have to go to a communal tap in the village that only comes on for 2 hours every single day. I got to fill up buckets and pails, and I got to walk back and forth carrying all this water, and then I have to ration and allocate the water accordingly. Okay, I have this much to drink, I have this much to bathe with, I have this much to wash clothes, and I had to make sure I keep it within that window as well. So a lot of challenges that I had to face along the way. But I will say this, and I hope I'm not getting too ahead of what you want to talk about here, but there was something very liberating about living that way too. Yes, I didn't have electricity or running water, but guess what? Didn't have to pay an electric bill or a water bill, so that was pretty good. I didn't have my car, but I did get issued a really nice Trek bicycle from Peace Corps, and so I didn't have to pay for any gas, and I got in pretty good shape because you got to pedal around everywhere you go. And I also got pretty resourceful too, because when you're out there by yourself, I mean, granted, I was, living in a village, so I had a lot of Gambians that were living all around me, but me being like the only American, and sometimes if I'm riding my bike or I'm somewhere out in the middle of the countryside, something goes wrong, I get a flat tire, you better buckle up pretty quick and get resourceful, otherwise you're stuck. So despite like the challenges, there was a lot of really good moments that had to be there as well. And and then I had like all this, and I also had a lot of time on my hands too. I spent a lot of time exercising, working on physical fitness. I was able to get a Kindle, bless my family's heart back home. They sent that to me with some Kindle files, and I was able to get some Kindle files from some of the other volunteers as well. So, and I read like 50 books over the 2 years that I was living there, got in really good shape, and really just got a brand new perspective on things, because the Gambians that I was living with, they kind of surprised me, and I was kind of fascinated by what I was observing on just the regular day. You'd think that with having so little and having to basically spend so much of your day doing these chores just to fulfill your basic needs, I feel like they would be unhappy or frustrated. And what I realized what I was doing was that I was imposing my own standards on them. But the fact is that those were some of the happiest people that I've ever seen in my life. And I think maybe a lot of that in part was kind of going back to what we sort of talked about earlier, was they were free of so much clutter. Because here in the States, let's face it, we're kind of materialistic. We like our material goods. We like our cars, we like our TVs, we like our internet, we like our phones, we like our video games, and fill in the blank basically. We like our stuff. But for them, they didn't but also all this stuff that we have, it comes with a lot of maintenance, a lot like paying for your like subscriptions, or hey, crap, this breaks, I need to get a new one now, and things like that. Or as I said, gas in the car and paying for the electric bill and so on and so forth. They didn't have any of that. and therefore they didn't have to deal with any of the stress that comes with that either. And I tell you, man, they were just living. They were just living. And again, it just felt really liberating. I mean, I'm not saying I would necessarily go back to that life per se, but it kind of made me reevaluate a lot of things when I got back. And I kind of cleaned house. I went into storage, all the stuff that I had stored away. And I'm thinking, okay, when did I get this thing? Like, was this a gift to me? Did I buy this? I don't remember buying this. Why do I have this? And so I took a lot of trips to Goodwill. I was donating clothes and all kinds of other stuff. And even now, if I ever have a Peace Corps volunteer ask me, what should I do with my stuff? Should I store it? Should I like give it to my parents? I'm like, well, if you haven't used it, get rid of it. Or I basically say, think about getting rid of it, because when you come back, you're probably not going to want to have to deal with any of that stuff anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think you and I both also got to know and have spoken to Joel Runyon from Impossible.
Yeah.
And I really like the way he described his philosophy around that to me is if you got something, you haven't used it in a while, you're just hoarding a resource that somebody else could take advantage of if you release it to them. And I'm really glad you brought up the point about just, kind of the happiness attached to simplicity and keeping things simple. Certainly, we have a lot of things here that make life more comfortable, but they don't necessarily make life more happy. And they do come with an overhead. And I can relate to both the squat toilet and the bucket of water to bathe and just the happiness to simple living, all of which I saw in the mountains of Nepal,
Mm-hmm.
which in a lot of ways is similarly rudimentary, but very, very happy people seemingly. And even you get used to the hole in the ground, the squat pit. The only thing is I've met a couple people that make the mistake at nighttime of walking in the wrong side of the building and fall in the pit. That's not so good. But yeah, it's amazing how adaptable people are and can just find happiness. We don't need all this, kind of stuff to make us happy. It's about the, kind of how you spend your time, as you said, and the quality of the people you spend it with. So, tell me a little bit more about that, or maybe in terms of how that time in Gambia took you from there to, was it the Marine Corps after that?
No, actually, my time in the Marine Corps came well before this. We're talking just post high school is when I decided to join the Marine Corps. And like, I'm talking no joke, 3 weeks after I walked across the stage at high school graduation, I was on a plane to San Diego to get my ass kicked for 3 months.
Okay. And did that
at
take
boot camp.
you overseas?
Actually, no. The unit I was attached to was called VMX 22. It's a V-22 Osprey Squadron, which some people might have seen these in movies before. They're becoming much more popular in movies, kind of like a hybrid between like a plane and a helicopter. And I'll just leave it at that for the description. But at the time that I had joined the Marine Corps, the Osprey was actually not operational. And what my squadron was in charge of was doing, a huge series of test flights to try to get the Osprey to go operational again so they could take it overseas to like the Middle East. So, let's see. And I think it was during that time in the Marine Corps when I really kind of gotten a pretty good foothold on like the rest of my life. I think it was a lot of foundational things that I had picked up during my time there that even to this day I still recall upon. And I think a lot of like the principles, and I think just certain character traits as well, like discipline, perseverance, and really just being, I guess I'll just say for all intents and purposes, pretty gritty, both mentally and physically, is really kind of served me well in a lot of other areas of my life, especially. And I think it sort of softened the blow with a lot of the challenges that I was sort of describing about being in Gambia, because, when you spend 3 months as an 18-year-old getting screamed in the face by really hardcore drill instructors, there's very little that can phase you beyond that point. So
That sounds like it would put life in perspective. Okay, I didn't realize the kind of sequencing there. I was curious because I've read a few books by a guy named Eric Greitens, I think is how you say his last name,
mm,
who is encountered some controversy. Was after his military career a political star, and then became governor, and there's some baggage there. But he before the military, if he wasn't in the Peace Corps, I think he was doing similar things. He got real creative about finding ways to travel as a younger guy, finding things like photographic scholarships through different agencies and educational paths where he could get paid as a photographer to go overseas and take pictures, and ran into a lot of humanitarian situations that actually were what led him after that into a career in the military and a desire to try to go protect people who didn't otherwise have somebody that could protect them from some bad stuff. So it's interesting what drives each person kind of along their life path, and particularly around travel, whether it sort of leads you into something or it's something that you've been led into. um, I guess really the key is getting started. And one of the things you and I talked about, and I think you talk about in terms of your blog and your podcast, is really that first step. Some of the common objections or excuses on why people don't travel internationally, but particularly Americans, right? It's a big continent, it's a big country. So, what would you say about that? What are some of the common things that keep people from traveling, and what do you say to those? How do you address them?
Well, I'd say there's a lot of answers to that question, but I think I'll kind of just focus on the two, I guess I'll say, common denominators that I tend to come across the most, and they both start with F, and that is fear and finances. Now, I'll start on the financial side first. A lot of people think they simply just can't afford to travel. Well, that's there's I wouldn't say that's an entirely an unreasonable thing to say too, because obviously travel costs money, and depending on what you do, it can get pretty costly, like, no doubt. And I'm not going to say I'm a little bit of a budget traveler. I wouldn't say that's necessarily my area of expertise. There's other bloggers and podcasters out there that are much more skilled in the art of budget travel than I am. But overall, though, I think one thing that holds a lot of people back financially, and a lot of them don't even realize this, that they have a lot of subscriptions. And what I mean by that is not just subscriptions with just, like, let's say, things like Netflix and streaming services, even though that does play a part of it, but just in kind of like their everyday, day to day. Let's talk about people who like to go to Starbucks first thing in the morning. That's a subscription right there, because that $3 that you spend on your triple mocha frappuccino with a couple shots of espresso. I don't really know what's at Starbucks. I don't really go there hardly, like, at all, but that stuff adds up after a while and they don't realize it. Or going out to lunch multiple times a week rather than taking your own lunch to work. That stuff adds up over time as well. And I've caught myself in this own trap too, where I'd say, oh, I shouldn't go to Orlando this weekend because I really can't afford it. But then I go and check my Capital One transactions. I'm like, well, come on, Josh, you went out to eat to lunch like 3 times this week. Okay, that's $30 down the drain that you could have used for gas to get you to Orlando, but you chose to do this instead. So, and then also on top of that, people got their cable bills, and now we got a gazillion and one streaming services that they're subscribed to. It's like, oh, well, we got Netflix. Oh, Disney Plus just came out. I want to watch The Mandalorian, so let me get that too. And, there's a lot of other things that they're subscribed to. But it's just, usually it's those little things that really add up. And that's, and I've also heard this described as a leaky pipe. You got water flowing through a pipe, and let's say that the water is your financial, your income, your revenue stream, if you will. And then people poke a lot of holes in that pipe with a lot of these small things. So I think it really kind of becomes down to just being deliberate and intentional with your spending. Like, maybe you can say, reduce going out to eat for lunch once a week, and then brown bagging it for the rest of the week. Or maybe I tend to fare more towards watching these Netflix series than these other streaming services, so let me just go ahead and cancel those. And I've even changed, like, mobile plans as well, because I found out, hey, this other mobile plan will still give me the same amount of coverage, but will have $20 less in the monthly fees. So it's kind of just really tightening up those small things, I think, is how a lot of people can address finances. And if we want to talk about a little bit of budget travel, is just, I always utilize the KISS rule, and that is keep it simple, stupid. And sometimes a lot of people think they need to go all out whenever they travel. It's like, let me throw down for the resort in this city or that city or what have you. So, and I'm now that I'm in my 30s, I'm kind of past that whole backpacking hostel stage. Let's just let all of us, like all 16 of us, camp out in a single room. I usually like to get at least like the private room, but maybe still share the bathroom with everyone else. That's fine. But a lot of times those are really, really just simple and affordable options. If you really wanted to rough it like that, you could pay maybe like about $20 a night US for, a hostel room somewhere. And then also is just, there's a lot of like other like experiences out there that you can do for free. Sometimes just simply just walking around exploring the city is not going to cost you anything either. And I noticed that a lot of people, when they travel, they spend a lot of money on things that they can't really take home with them. And what I mean by that is things like, again, we'll go back to, let's say, buying a coffee every single morning or going to get alcohol at a bar and things like that. It's just those you can't really take home with you. Those aren't really memories that will last and stand the test of time. Going to, let's say, wandering off the beaten path and seeing, I don't know, like whatever the case may be. I remember, I'll talk about my time in Lisbon, Portugal. I just went out walking and I just came across this like back street way up a hill that had a lot of really cool like street art and stuff like that. And it offered this amazing view. I didn't have to pay a cent for that, but I just remember how amazing the city looked way down below when I made the climb all the way up there. So it's just really being deliberate and intentional with finances. So I'll address it there. And moving on to the next point.
I'm sorry, before we jump into fear, I mean, I think that's
sure.
great way to create a memory. I think you and I talked a little bit about kind of background on your show. I'm an econ guy, and economics is all about scarcity of resources, which basically means you just have to make choices, which is the same thing that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'll throw out another extreme that I don't think you and I covered, which is another great example of just making choices. So we met some travelers that have become really good friends. They were traveling the entire world for like 15 months, more than a year. A married couple with 2 school-age kids. And these guys were not roughing it. They were going on, package tours. They were going on all the optionals. They were doing it big. But their life at home was, had a lot of overhead to it as well. The kids were both in private school, like a high-end private school. And in hindsight, once they got back, they realized that, they do pay a lot for a high-end education for their kids. But having pulled their kids out of school for that year and homeschooled them as they traveled, what they didn't have to pay for private school that year actually paid for the trip for the year. So it's, kind of all back to the
Right.
trade-offs and having a creative look at things.
Yeah, definitely. So like moving on to fear, to keep us going in our conversation here, is a lot of times this is what I've observed when I try to tell other people about my stories, and they're fascinated by the idea of travel, but a lot of times they are afraid to, not just so much for like the fear of the unknown, which is very much like a valid fear. That's kind of like one of the core fears that humans have, is fearing the unknown. But a lot of fears that are kind of perpetuated by things like social media. There's a lot of negativity in social media and mainstream media, and we're constantly just being bombarded with like the worst aspects of humanity like out there. And so they see terrorist attacks happening here, happening there, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be anywhere near that. And that's a valid concern, but I just kind of think that as long as you really utilize just simply common sense, which, and just actually kind of just keep your wits about you, if you're in a foreign country and you don't spend your entire time this is from a quote from Pat McNamara. He refers to this as 45-degree culture that we live in today. 45 degrees means your head's always tilting down at a 45-degree angle looking at your phone. As long as you kind of have your head on a swivel and keeping your wits about you, then you should, be pretty much good to go. And I'm not talking about being paranoid. I'm not talking about breaking your neck, with moving your head in every which way direction, but, being aware, being aware of your surroundings. And I would almost dare say that, and this is kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about Japan, is that I felt more at ease and safer in other cities abroad than I have in most of the cities here in the US. And because I feel like walking through some of the streets of New York City, I'm a little bit more on guard than if I'm walking some of the streets in German cities, And now maybe some people might have different perspectives on that, but at least that's how I felt too. So, and there's also this thing out there called the Global Peace Index, where this thing literally rates different country, or it ranks different countries based on how peaceful they are, with one being the highest score, or I guess you can say the safest country, with 193 being the most dangerous country. Within that list, US is ranked around like 118. So if you want to go by that metric, which seems to be a pretty well recognized metric, is that it's we're not all that safe of a country ourselves. So it was like,
So, that would say there are 117 places that are safer than here. And I've met international travelers in the US that are scared to death, that something that they see glorified in news or media or movies or something is going to happen when I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about your here quickly about your career as an archaeologist. And you got a military background. I've seen your Instagram. You got some gun skills. You got some martial arts skills. I call you like the real life Indiana Jones.
I appreciate that.
But you're I mean, it doesn't take superhero skills to go travel the world safely. And I'm glad you brought up Global Peace Index. I did not know about that resource. I've used things like the U.S. State Department as sort of one data
which is
point.
A good one to use.
The UK has another one that has a little bit of a different, I don't know, maybe aptitude for things than the U.S. You get a couple data points. I like picking up like a Lonely Planet guide for where I'm going and kind of reading about things to do. I don't know, any other resources that you like, or are those kind of the major ones?
I think those are kind of the major ones there for sure. Yeah. The State Department will, of course, issue travel warnings if they think that there's something going on, and also kind of leave you like a little bit of tidbits, especially places to avoid. Like when I was on my way to Israel, I didn't realize that the entire Gaza Strip was under control by a terrorist organization at the time. So it's a good thing I knew that ahead of time, so I didn't venture into that area, because it's right along the coast. And I was wondering maybe if the beaches would have been cool or something, but I avoided that area. So yes, I'd say those are some key resources right there.
Okay, cool. Well, let's shift into your next big adventure. So you gave me a bit of a hint, I think, offline from when we talked, and you were at the time about to announce this. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Has this been announced yet? Can we talk about your next big adventure?
We can talk about it, because I think by the time this episode goes live, I would have already announced it myself. So let's go for it.
So tell me where you're headed, what you're going to do, and this sounds like a ton of fun as an adventure for you, but this all has a bigger cause and mission.
Yes, exactly. Well, this adventure that we're referring to, I've called Operation Dual Trek, dual as in two, basically. And what it is, I am looking to walk the entire length of two South American countries, Paraguay and Uruguay. And yes, it is going to be for a worthy cause. I'm looking to raise money for a nonprofit organization that I support called American Veterans Archaeological Recovery. It was formerly known as Operation Nightingale USA, so that name probably might come up a little bit too. But American Veterans Archaeological Recovery, or AVAR as it's shortened, what they do is they take wounded veterans and maybe other veterans who might be suffering from things like TBI or what have you, and they take them onto archaeological digs. And there's a multifaceted purpose as to why they do that. For one, it allows veterans a chance to connect with other veterans, because when a lot of veterans transition out of the military, a critical piece that they're missing is their tribe. They were part of this tribe of warriors for a good part of their life. Now they're not. And so that part of their identity is missing for all intents and purposes. So it gets them connected with other veterans. It also gives them another mission. They spent a good amount of their time. They spent their time in the military protecting our freedom, our way of life. Now they have a mission to protect cultural heritage, which is pretty cool, if I do say so. And also, this isn't really like a vacation per se. I mean, it can feel vacation-like, especially with the travel aspect, which I'll get to in a second. But it's more or less like a program. Like there's certain things that the people within AVAR try to do to set their participants up for success. Who knows? Maybe having this experience, maybe those who participate may think archaeology might be something they want to pursue as a career. Okay, well, here's some next steps that you can follow. Here's some people you can talk to. Hey, feel free to list this as a reference, if you'd like, or if they want to pursue something else. Okay, great. Well, let's see what we can do to get you on the track. So it's basically they try to set it up to where they don't return from this event just to the same position that they were. If they're there, if they come out on the digs, we want to set them up for some success moving forward, because obviously they got a long life ahead of them just within like the length of time that they're there at the dig site. And the CEO and founder of this organization, Stephen Humphreys, he's a former Air Force captain, good friend of mine, and he kind of gave me a little bit of a leg up in my own archaeology career, because I met him in England. He was there studying at the same time I was, and he set it up to where I can come out on a dig that he was leading. And that gave me some very necessary field experience, and also allowed me to create that connection. And so and that kind of served me well as I returned from my grad school experience, because I studied archaeology in the UK. I don't know if we mentioned that yet. And once I came back here, it helped me, get my career rolling here. So I definitely an organization that I really trust. And the way that this is going to be set up is we have a GoFundMe page for this, and basically it's set up to where all donations that come in, they go straight to the organization. I will see none of this money. I'm actually going to be self-financing the entire cost of this expedition. And so because that's ultimately what it is I really want to do. I'm not even really seeking sponsors for this expedition either. And if I do, I'm only going to accept like maybe gear sponsorships or something like that. If anyone wants to insist on sponsoring this expedition financially, I would just ask them that they go send whatever money they thought about sponsoring and go donate it. Because, it's just when I think about a lot of things that are happening within the veteran community, where they say 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I'm not sure how accurate that number is today. I know that was kind of an arbitrary number that was set a few years ago that kind of stuck. It could be more than that. It could be less. I certainly hope that it's less. But let's just say, for the sake of discussion, it's 22. That's 22 lives that could have added some value in this world. 22 lives that could have been leaders of a community, leaders of a family, maybe leaders of a business that could thrive and go out and serve others, or maybe valuable employees in a job somewhere. And so when I just think about that, man, it's just heartbreaking. Just the value that veterans can bring to this world, because they've done veterans have already done amazing things. Because talking about, like, I know I only briefly talked about boot camp, but it really takes something special to pull through boot camp, and that's an amazing thing to achieve, just to get through that alone. And maybe that's I'd also say that's another big reason why I want to do this expedition, because I've never done a through hike before. I mean, I've done other cool challenges. I've done Spartan races and other obstacle course races. I've cycled long distances before. I did MMA fighting, fought in the cage and won, and things like that. I ran a marathon, but I've never done something like this before. So to some degree, I'm wondering, can I do it? Am I capable of it? And I believe that I am. And I think part of this journey and part of the story that I want to tell is I kind of want to, maybe showcase and maybe remind, I guess I'll say, the veteran community not just the veteran community, but just us as in humans in general, is that we are capable of doing amazing things. Like if you're in like the city somewhere, look at those skyscrapers. We built those. Look at some of these ancient wonders out there, the Great Pyramids of Giza and things like that. We freaking built those. We are, there is so many amazing things that we are capable of doing as humans. And so that's kind of what I think I just really want to try to showcase. And that's the point I really want to drive home with this expedition. And also remind veterans of as well, is that you all are capable of doing amazing things because you already have done amazing things. Boot camp and and anything that you've done, with your deployments or throughout your military careers, is that you've done some pretty amazing shit, and you can continue on living amazing lives, and don't lose track of that. So yeah, but overall, that's kind of basically what I'm going to be doing in a nutshell. And I'm going to be stepping off in June of this year.
June. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's an incredible endeavor, but also just an incredible reminder, as you said, for all of us. You spent some time here in San Diego. It's a huge military town. It's also a town that has a hugely successful veteran community, entrepreneurs, and a support for that. But it's also a community that has a huge number of veterans that are effectively lost as homeless. Mm-hmm. And then, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other challenges, including suicides. You mentioned TBI, PTS, and so there's an incredible cause there that I love to hear that you are that you're supporting. And there are a lot of people who kind of travel and work and live on the nonprofit dime, if you will. I think even some of the big organizations that are fairly lean still consume 10% of donations to run the company. So you are doing something where 100% of the GoFundMe is going to go to this cause. It ties back to your career as an archaeologist. I love that it's creating a tribe again. It's providing a mission for the group of guys. And I know you're going to be able to do it, man. I think you've told me it's 1,000 miles or so.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to do it because you've got an incredible purpose behind this. You just described your why, and your passion comes through about this cause that you're going to help. So I know that's the fuel that's going to get you through this thing. And I will get the details from you on the GoFundMe, so we can put that in the show notes for this episode on the website and with
awesome.
the
Appreciate
podcast. And honored to help spread the word on that cause. What else should listeners know about finding you and your podcast, your website, your travel blog?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is allaroundadventure.com. And you could listen to the podcast there if you'd like, or you can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all those major podcasting platforms. You can find it there as well. If you'd like to connect with me on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram at All Around Adventure. That's just one word, no dashes. I'm on Twitter at All Around Advent. Couldn't quite fit the URE because Twitter doesn't allow for very long usernames there, but you can find me over there, All Around Advent. I'm also on YouTube, kind of starting to put videos out in that space as well. I guess I'll probably just have to send you the link, because when you're just kind of starting off and you have less than like 100 subscribers, they give you like some weird wonky link. I can't create a custom link just yet, but I'll get that to you. But they can find me on YouTube as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I found that link. It's already up on my site. And you think you'll be shooting some videos to share on YouTube along your fundraising adventure in Paraguay and Uruguay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll also, let people know that this is going to be a pretty raw adventure. Like I'm doing this pretty much solo and unsupported, meaning I'm not going to have like a fancy camera crew with me or anything like that, or I'm not going to have like, some support vehicle. It's just I'm going to be self-filming, just out there pretty much just being nomadic, going across these countries like that. But yeah, I do plan to do some vlogs, and I'm also hoping I can continue to podcast too now. And also with the podcast, I will be taking a little bit of a production break per my usual. I mean, I don't think I'll be able to really interview guests for my show while I'm way out there in the middle of nowhere. So, but I do hope to continue putting up podcasts, which will more or less be like updates, like Dual Trek Chronicles, or I don't know, that's a working title. Working title. So they'll see a little bit of a change of pace with the podcast if I'm able to get them up. I hope Libsyn has like a mobile recording app that I could use or something. I have to look into that, but that's something I still hope to do.
Yeah, no, it sounds like an incredible adventure, and I know whatever you're able to share out of that, just you and a guy with a cell phone and a GoPro or whatever it's going to be, that'll be awesome to tune into. I wasn't sure if you had any other vets coming along with you, and I know we got to talk about this real briefly because I thought it was pretty funny when you talk about it being raw, and I know you're talking about how to plan this thing out. You've described Paraguay to me as the country that Google Maps forgot.
Yeah, because now going with Google Maps, typically they got that little guy stick figure thing towards like the bottom right that you can grab, and then all the streets will highlight where you are, and you can just kind of drop right there on the street and get the street view for that one particular spot. But when I tried doing that with Paraguay, almost nothing like lit up at all. And I'd say probably at least like half of the country, which is the areas I'm going to be walking to like the northwest of the area, which is called the Gran Chaco region, where I'm starting. Nothing came up there. So I'm not sure what's on the ground that I'm going to be up against really, or what it's going to be looking like for me. So I hope like, yeah, I hope I'm not going to run into like, scarcity of water sources or anything like that. But I always say that if I have to go anywhere to resupply, I want to get dropped right back to where I left off and continue on there. I don't want to, like I said, get a little bit ahead down or a little bit down the road and then just continue from where I go from there. I want to go right back to it and keep on moving and do it right. Cause like I said, I'm determined to walk the length, so it's going to be it's going to be interesting.
That's really cool, and it's a little bit kind of old school. Now there's all this technology, you can kind of jump into Street View or whatever, and get some idea about where you're going. That going back to the fear thing, that's a way of getting a little bit comfortable before you actually go. So you're getting the old school experience, right, where you have no idea what to expect. You're going to drop in and figure it out.
Yeah. And I think, yes, we've talked a lot about fear today, but one thing we didn't really talk about that I think could almost be like a stronger human characteristic, and that is the curiosity. I think curiosity is also another very powerful thing in our minds too. And I think that's another thing that kind of is drawing me to these places is because, well, for one, not only have I not been to South America before, but I haven't been to either one of these countries. And I know very few people who actually have. So I don't really have like a lot of stories or intel from people who've been on the ground to tell me anything. For all intents and purposes, these countries are quote unquote uncharted territory to me. So, but I think curiosity has always driven us as humans. If you want to go all the way back to our ancient ancestors, who saw the sunset over a hill and was wondering what's beyond that hill, so they decided to walk over there and take a look, or those who saw this massive body of water in front of them and trying to put together some sort of contraption that could float so they could go see what's beyond the horizon. Or even just, if you want to get a little bit more recently, what the hell's on the moon? So let's see if we can build something that could take us to space. So I think, curiosity is a very huge driving factor that I think all of us human beings have. And I'm sure you could probably even got pretty excited when you planned your, backpacking trip around the world and was looking at the map and just thinking about, okay, where should I go? I mean, what's out there, right? I think it's just something that we all have as humans. And I think that's what also makes this trip pretty exciting, even if there's a lot of unknowns to it as well.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. That curiosity is something that probably fuels the desire for travel.
Mm-hmm.
But likewise, I think travel, it perpetuates that curiosity and starts to develop it, which as you found from your first 2 weeks abroad in Japan, has spawned into a whole passion and indeed sort of a career, as well as the endeavor, and now the philanthropic cause that you've got. So incredible story. Why don't we wrap up with a couple of quick ones? These are tough questions to ever pick a favorite, but I'm going to ask you for a couple favorites. We'll go rapid here and use this to maybe close out with some ideas to hopefully excite some other people about going to new places and trying new things. So, favorite place you've traveled to, Josh?
Well, I probably would go back to Japan, but I would also say Japan could potentially be tied with Morocco. Like
Oh,
I loved visiting Morocco. I, got to visit some of the souks in cities like Marrakesh and Fez. I did some trekking in the Atlas Mountains, and I went out to the Sahara Desert and rode camels for a few days. And I'll tell you what, man, when you're out in the middle of the desert, the night sky is just, it's unbelievable, where you have no light pollution. And when I went out there, it was a full moon, and it might as well have just been daytime because that full moon was so bright because nothing was, inhibiting its light whatsoever. So I'd say those two countries are tied.
awesome. Okay, Morocco has definitely been on my list. So great to hear that reinforced. I want to go see that. And yeah, I can think of a time I was camping pretty remotely. It's the first, maybe the only time that I was able to see so many stars that I could actually see the Milky
Mm-hmm.
Way belt,
Oh, yeah.
which I think a lot of people, in a modern city with light pollution have never seen. Okay, favorite person you've met through travel?
Okay, that's an easy one. My baby host sister
Okay,
that I had in the Gambia. Her name was Isa too. She was born about 3 months after I had arrived, and I'm telling you, man, it was just. She's also probably I think what I was able to do for her was probably my greatest accomplishment. I'll try not to keep the story too long, but basically, the Gambia is a hotspot for malaria, and I noticed that my host family's house didn't have mosquito nets. So I talked to my host father, and I told him a little bit about malaria. Now, typically for many Gambians, malaria is almost kind of like, to them, it's like a catch-all term for if you're sick in general. If you got a cough, you got the regular flu, you got malaria. That's kind of how they view it. But when I tried to explain to him that it was its own distinct disease and that it was the mosquitoes that spread it, he kind of looked at me with like this weird like shock in his face, like I just blew his mind. And so then he took the initiative and he got a mosquito net for every single bed in the house. And for Isa too, he got her this like kind of mosquito net that was sort of shaped like a crock pot lid. So they just lay her in her crib, and then they just cover her with this like crock pot lid mosquito net. And I tell you, man, that just warmed my heart. So it's just, whenever I really think of my time in Peace Corps, she's one of the first people that come to mind. So
wow,
don't know if she'll remember her big brother, but I'm definitely not going to forget her.
that's so cool that you had that connection and in a way that you made a difference in a number of lives. Okay, and food we talked about. You and I both love to eat, and there's all kinds of fun stuff you can try when you're traveling to different places. And I think you've told me you kind of have a philosophy of just saying, yeah, let me give it a try. What's the most interesting food that you've tried around the world?
All right. Let's see. I can name three because I actually did a blog post on this.
Okay.
When I was in London, I went to this exotic food place. I had mealworms, pan fried crickets, chocolate covered locusts for dessert. That was pretty interesting. So I just had like a bug smorgasbord that I tried there. When I was in Gambia, I ate a bush rat. One of the students at my school, this was during a weekend campfire for the scout program that I was helping to coordinate. He brought me and another teacher this big giant rat that he had dangling by its tail, and I told him to get rid of it. And he's like, "Oh no, Mister, we'll eat it." And I'm like, "What? No, get rid of it." But then the teacher says, "Oh no, they're edible. We can eat them. It's fine." So at that point, I was just kind of intrigued. I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, bring me a piece, when you're done cooking it." So they brought me the front leg of this giant rat. Turned out what this student had done is he literally took a bucket of water and literally flushed this thing out of its hole. Just poured all the water in the hole. When the rat came out, snatched it up, killed it with his bare hands, and then made us breakfast. And then the third one, and I kind of ate this unknowingly, but it was ram testicle. And we had Tabaski, which is a Muslim holiday uh, and then when we had this ram in the backyard for a few days. They slaughtered it and they removed the ram's testicles, and my little host brother carried them away in a bowl, and I lost track of them from there. And then it wasn't until after we had our feast that night where I thought to myself, wait a second, where'd those testicles go that my little host brother carried away? So I asked one of my host brothers about it, and they said, oh yeah, the testicles were in the bowl. I'm like, great. I just ended that night with ram testicle in my stomach, which that sounds so wrong to say out loud, but yeah. So I can't really tell you on how that tasted, because at this point I was just so hungry that, I just saw all this protein in this bowl, because we didn't get meat very often while I was living there. So I just, went crazy. So,
hey man, that's how you know when you're the VIP guest, when they're flushing out a rat to cook up, or you get all the best parts of the ram. So I know you've got some amazing stories, and we could probably go on for a long time, but I think the best way to wrap it up is to say all this stuff gets packaged up in what you created. This is why you have the All Around Travel podcast, and you've got the blog on your website. So I know I started off by saying that it's your mission to share amazing tales, and I think this is just a great little preview for people of what you have going on over there. Again, I will put the links to your podcast website, your social media, in the show notes for this episode, and I want to make sure I hook up with you afterwards, and we'll get the link to the GoFundMe as well. Knowing that you'll be pivoting away from the typical podcast here come June, and you're on an incredible mission that I hope we can all help support.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me on today, man. And I appreciate you allowing me to share my story and tell a little bit about what I got coming up. And, this definitely was a great conversation. I will encourage the listeners that, again, if they want like a prelude or a prequel, depending on how the episodes come out, you yourself, Michael, was a guest on my show. We had a great conversation over there. So do go check that one out as well.
Yeah, you bet. I will also cross-link to that one once you have it posted, and we can cross-promote that, get people kind of sharing back and forth, and hopefully tuning in. And man, yeah, no, pleasure is all mine. Thanks for coming by, Josh. And I'd like to have you back once you return from your next big adventure and hear all about that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come back on for sure.
All right, man. Well, thanks again today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot. Well, there you have it, everyone. Another episode of the blog readings is in the books. I hope you enjoyed listening to my interview on the Man of Mastery podcast today. Now, typically, this is the part of the show where I ask you to rate, comment, subscribe, and so on and so forth. But this time around, I'm just going to ask you to support the Man of Mastery podcast. I think it's a really great show. Michael is an excellent host. He's talking to a lot of other amazing guests, and I think he's got a great mission that he's working towards. So definitely go connect with him on his website and his social media accounts, and go tune into the podcast, and you can find links to all of those in the show notes for this episode. And also be on the lookout next Saturday, because Michael's going to be featured as a guest on this podcast, and you get to hear more about his story as well. And I guess that's all I have to say for now, so be sure to check back in next Saturday with my interview with Michael Bulloch that goes live on this show, and also I have my Wisdom Wednesday segment on Wednesday that you could look forward to. But until then, I'm Josh Guerrero saying be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.